am going to introduce week 7 in-class activity. It was originally introduced this past week, which was week 7. It was introduced to every student who attended either online or in-person intro classes this week, but I'm going to provide an official review for it for those who still need to work on it or would like a rehashing of it. So the description. This week we will further explore universal design principles. By now you should have watched the lecture video and or read the lecture PDF related to universal design principles, both titled 7 Principles of Universal Design. On the second page of this handout, there are 2 different scenarios needing your design expertise, specifically through the lens of universal design principles. Each scenario presents different users or clients, locations, space types, and needs. Your task is to evaluate each scenario individually. Create a list of important questions you would ask the user or client to assess the spatial needs and translate these needs into a creation of a program. And based on the project, you will also need to create the cross criteria of the program. We'll talk about this. Using that program to guide you, you will also create 2 bubble diagrams per project. And so the deliverables are in person, either at the end of the class, which was last week, or just bring it with you to the next class you attended in person, or submit this coming week online. There is a Dropbox open on Elearning for this assignment. This date is incorrect. Monday is actually the 19th, but just use throughout the week to submit it. And so for each project, we'll have a page 1 and a page 2. So you'll have 4 pages minimum. On page 1, you will have the list of important questions that you would ask prior to beginning a project. You would create the program and the program cross criteria, and you will create a concept statement. And then on page 2, you will have the 2 bubble diagrams and then important notations related to those bubble diagrams that include at least 3 universal design principles. And so here is some assignment requirements. All writing must be done in handwritten architectural lettering. Keep pages and compositions in mind and consistent. And so the information here, such as project name, client, and location, will need to be on each page, as well as your name, fall 2020, and then our class name on each page. I have an example to show you, and you don't need to follow the compositional design and format of the arrangement of this information, just as long as you have it all on each page and it's consistent within your project. So here is scenario 1. The clients are Carlos and Lucy Martinez. The project is their residence, and the location is Metro Chicago. The Martinez family recently moved to Metro Chicago from Texas. Carlos and Lucy lived in Texas for 5 years following the birth of their only child, Tony. Once Tony began kindergarten, Lucy planned on going back to law school. She was recently accepted into a prestigious university downtown Chicago. The Martinez family is thrilled. Lucy is away at school most days and completing homework late at night. Carlos works from home and balances his days taking care of Tony, as his kindergarten classes are every other day. Lucy and Carlos quickly realize that they need to remodel their townhome to accommodate their new professional and family needs. They hired a college student to care for Tony when he is at home, and would like Tony to have a centralized area where he can play, learn, and relax during the day that is visually and acoustically separated from Carlos's home office. Lucy also needs a workspace of her own and could no longer keep working in Carlos's office at night. She requires a proper desk, lighting, and storage for books to effectively complete her homework each night. She also enjoys cooking pre-made meals for her family at night while she works or takes a break from work. Below are the initial spaces the Martinez family identified they need. With all members of the family being busy, it is important for the family to come together as a unit for quality time on the weekends and whenever crossing paths throughout the week. So here's the list of spaces that was touched on in that description. So we have Lucy and Carlos's primary bedroom and primary bathroom, Tony's bedroom and full bathroom, Carlos's home office, Lucy's workspace, a half bath, a kitchen, a living and or family area, a dining area, and then a multi-purpose space for Tony during the day. You might come up with more spaces based on your concept and your ideas, but these are the minimum spaces needed. And so these are the spaces that you can apply to your program. So I'm going to pass scenario 2, we'll come back to that, and go to the example page. So the name of the project, which I just called Martinez Residence, you might call it something else, and the client's name and the location, Carlos and Lucy Martinez, Chicago, Illinois. And then you would have your design concept. I did a sample design concept. The Martinez residence unifies the family as much as possible, while also creating individualized spaces for each member that supports and complements the unique attributes that each person brings to the family and home. So I thought of that because the last sentence in the description talked about how they really need a space that brings them together and unifies them as a family. And they want to, really take advantage of the quality time that they have because they're so busy. So my concept for a potential design would be to really focus on that. And so based on that, what are some questions that you might want to ask the Martinez family before you approach their project? So you might ask, what activities or hobbies do they like to do as a family? Do they spend time outside? What rooms does the babysitter need to access? So think about important, as you're thinking about a design, what questions come to mind that you think should have answers to before you start. And then here's an example of a program. Your program does not need to be formatted like this. This is the same format we did for assignment 1 in design communication. So you would list all the spaces on the left-hand side, and that list of spaces is provided. And then across the top, you would come up with different criteria that supports your concept. So in design communication 1, we had square footage, furniture, lighting, and views. You could stay with that, or you could think about something else that supports your concept. So for this example concept, I might, if we want a space that complements and supports the attributes that each person brings to the family and home, one of these criteria, I might have adjacencies. So for instance, Lucy likes to cook while she works. So I think when we get to Lucy's workspace, it might be important to put an adjacency to the kitchen. And also, Carlos needs visual and acoustical separation from Tony's area during the day. And so an adjacency could touch on that as well. That doesn't mean that their spaces aren't adjacent. It just means that they're separated very intentionally. You might also think about how each person uses the space, and primary users, or perhaps the main times of day that the space is used, because we have different people using the spaces in the residence at different times of the day. So for instance, Lucy's workspace probably, would be and you could make up the time frame, but it might be between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. And the kitchen, she's also in the kitchen at night, and it says she makes pre-made meals. So I would assume that the cooking, she's the primary food preparer and cooker, chef for the family. And so Carlos doesn't particularly use the kitchen during the day, other than basic things. We're not really sure about the babysitter, if she prepares some kind of lunch. You'll have to think about that. You can elaborate on the story and create some circumstances based on your concept as well. There's very minimal information provided, and that's for a reason, because there's a lot of blanks that you can fill in. And since this is a hypothetical project, you have the ability to become the Martinez family and elaborate more. So you could speak for Lucy on what her hobbies are, for instance. And then I just did a sample student name and class name down at the bottom. So I chose on this page to put, this information at the top and then my information at the bottom. You could reverse it. You could put this information underneath here, whatever works best with your composition. And you might not have the same program format. There's a lot of different ways to communicate program. So just think about the composition, and when somebody reads this that's not privy to design or the project itself, you want to be able to easily communicate and tell the story of the Martinez family, their project, their needs, and then your process. And then it leads on to the second page. I've put the same information again, Martinez residents, Carlos and Lucy Martinez in Chicago. And then this page requires 2 bubble diagrams. And so that means it also requires 2 ideas. Each bubble diagram is associated with a different idea. So for the example, I wrote idea 1, direct view of family space from the entry emphasizes the Martinez family priorities. Individual spaces along the side are arranged in their supporting relationship to each other. So I was thinking that they, since they value family time so much and they want to maximize it, I think like almost having a reminder of it, because we can get so caught up in our work and they're very busy. The description mentioned that even if they cross paths, that can count as family time. So right from the get-go, when you walk in, I'm thinking in this idea that this family space could be, in the back, but you would have a direct view from the entry to the family space as opposed to the work areas, which are around the edges of the residence. But they would be arranged in a way to support each other. So thinking about where the kitchen might be located and what the kitchen supports. So perhaps the dining in the family, Lucy's workspace. It might need to be somewhat centrally located to Carlos's office and Tony's area. So think about, an idea that could, attempt to capture your concept and how you would think about explaining it the way I just did, of when you walk in, the first thing you see is like a focal point, that wow moment of view of this family space. Really means like home is home, even though we're busy. And then along the sides, and it said a minimum of 3, I have 4 here, include a note with an arrow going to the space that you're talking about. So these notes will pertain to the universal design principles. And on the last page of the assignment, I've listed those for you. If you remember, these are the 7. So let's see, flexibility in use. So that is a great universal design principle because it means that the space can be flexible based upon the people using it and what they need it for. So it's not super strict to any specific situation or person, which means that it could almost discriminate or leave others out or their needs out. Even though this is a private residence, it's not necessarily a public space, but they do have, each person living here has different needs. There's a variety of ages. We have a 5-year-old, a college student, and then two, adults, one who also is a student herself, and the other who is a full-time worker. And so that flexibility in use could really apply to all of those people and all of those needs. So we would return to the bubbles and think about where this flexibility in use could apply. So maybe it could be to the family area because maybe they have relatives that visit and they also want to spend quality time with them, or their quality time includes a variety of different types of activities and hobbies. And so you could write, explain the flexibility in use idea. The Carlos or the Martinez family needs a living area that's flexible in use so that it is accommodating to a variety of activities and people using the space. Something like that. What's another one that we can think of? Let's see. Okay, so simple and intuitive use. So we did look at that in the last activity when we were looking at our spaces and photographing them and thinking about how we could redesign them to improve them. And so this intuitive use, you've probably walked into a space where it seemed confusing and not intuitive, but you've probably walked into a space that, felt like intuitive and you felt like you understood it, even though it was your first time there. So that is the idea, is that we are trying not to isolate anybody and we want the space to be accessible, both physically and psychologically to people. So a simple and intuitive use, you could be thinking about the connection with the babysitter and what spaces in the house does she actually need access for, and what spaces would best support her, because she doesn't live here. They might have different babysitters throughout the time, or they might have different people using Tony, watching Tony, and he will grow. So his interests are going to change drastically from year to year. So they might need Tony's area to be simple and intuitive so that regardless of who's watching him, maybe he has friends over, maybe he's having a party, or, whatever the situation is, that space is clearly defined, and perhaps there's a bathroom nearby so that anybody there isn't looking around the house for a bathroom. Perhaps the kitchen's nearby. So there's some spatial arrangements that are simple and intuitive to the area. So that would be another example. And so all 7 could apply, but there's probably some ones that are specific to supporting your concept and your idea. And that's where you're going to want to think about those. We're not actually designing the spaces, so you don't need to show design evidence that you're doing these things. It's just you're writing the note down with an arrow. So simple and intuitive use, I would point to, Tony's area or the kitchen or the bathroom or that whole zone. And then you would do another bubble diagram. And I put these both on this, obviously these bubble diagrams don't apply to these scenarios, but I put these both on the page as an example of potential size that could be appropriate for a composition if you are going to maintain 2 bubble diagrams on the page. If you want to go bigger and do one bubble diagram per page as well, that's okay. So idea 2, the circulation, which is the space in between all the rooms. It's the hallways, it's the walkways, those types of areas. So the circulation is circular around the residence, wrapping around Tony's multi-purpose space and the kitchen where the Martinez family cooks together. So this is an example where I went out on a limb, and this would have been one of my questions. Do they like to cook together? Or perhaps what do they like to do together? So I answered it that they like to cook together. And so how this supports the concept of unifying family and having spaces that support each other is that the multi-purpose space in the kitchen is centralized and all the other spaces wrap around it. So thinking about where it says dining room here, that would be the kitchen and Tony's space. But then all of the other rooms or spaces kind of, hug that area so that it's saying that this is the centralized hub in the space. And if they, were spending quality time in the kitchen, that definitely emphasizes, how the family can become a unit. Tony's space may end up being a space that brings everyone together, since he they will have interactions with him every single day, and perhaps they go into his area for relaxation and playing as well. So thinking about that, it's very similar to the one above it, but it's just slightly different in that this the concept or the idea of the arrangement was that once you enter, the first thing you see is this big focal point on like the family room. And in this one, you don't have that. You have all the spaces wrapping around the kitchen and the play area, which, if you think about it, those 2 rooms are probably the most active and used by the most people throughout the day. So it makes sense that they're centralized so people can come and go out of the rooms as needed. And then you would go through the same task of selecting appropriate universal design principles and notating them with an arrow here. And so, maybe that simple and intuitive use would also be in here as well with, okay, the most active spaces are in the middle, and then around the edges, we have the supporting spaces. So, and if you were to come up with more spaces on the program, add more rooms, maybe an exterior area or a patio, you can talk about maybe part of your concept is about the outside. It's in Chicago, so they have really nice weather for a short amount of time of the year, and they're from Texas, so they might want to really maximize that nice weather, more so than somebody who's used to having these frigid winters. So yeah, that's the overall concept to this assignment. And so we really focused on the Martinez for this example, but I'm going to go over the second scenario. The second scenario is a seniors neighbor center. It's a community center, and it's located in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and these are all hypothetical. The Senior Neighbor Center is a local community center for retired seniors to gather, enjoy various events such as game nights, musical performances, film screenings, and dance lessons. Many of the seniors who regularly come to the center have physical mobility constraints, including being in wheelchairs or needing walking aids such as walkers or scooters. The senior demographic at the center is primarily single seniors and veterans. On a daily basis, the center provides space and a schedule of activities for approximately 25 to 35 seniors. It is not uncommon to walk by the Senior Neighbor Center and see a small group of men playing cards in the large front windows. Many of the seniors enjoy spending time near the front windows, as there's a bakery across the street with lots of people walking outside. Until now, the center has been able to accommodate all seniors and activities in a large multi-purpose space with various seating niches around the edges. As the center grows, it is necessary to remodel the space so that it can include a small library, a kitchen, and a small cafe that sells baked goods from the bakery across the street, in addition to a space for meetings, for book clubs or discussions, a game room, and then the multi-purpose space for things such as dance, musical performances, special events, and it has a small stage. The center would like their new space to feel welcoming and encourage socialization. And below are the spaces needed that were outlined in this description. So a welcoming entry, a game room, a meeting room, a multi-purpose event space, a cafe, a kitchen, a library, and then 4 single stall bathrooms and 3 private workspaces for employees and volunteers. So these 3 private workspaces don't need to be offices. So, you don't need to think about adding additional rooms. I mean, you could, if you wanted, you could have like a back of house work area, but the senior center does have employees and volunteers. So they might need a space to put their bags or their items or store different things that they bring with them. And then the single stall bathrooms, make sure to think about how those bathrooms can accommodate the specific demographic using the space. And so you would list these down the side of your program if that's the format you'd like to pick. Let me go back to the example page down here, and then you would select appropriate criteria based on your concept. So I noticed that the end of this description talks about their new space feeling welcoming and encourage socialization. So I didn't provide an example for this one, but an example concept idea could be that the entry area really focuses on those large windows so that it really connects community and the center together. It's kind of like dissecting the word community center. And it's the center is like not just for the senior community, but it's the community outside and the center inside, and they meet in the middle. Because we do have now a small cafe that sells baked goods. So it's possible that people will be coming to the Senior Neighbor Center to buy their baked goods or their coffee, whatever else that the cafe would sell. Perhaps they use the library, or they meet family members, or they come to an event. So you can fill in the blanks of the story of what exactly is happening in this space and what types of criteria would be important, what types of questions would be important. I'm sensing in this space that square footage is important, since we do have essentially a capacity here. There's no size needed, so we don't have to try to keep things within a specific range, but you do want to think about like how much space would a scooter take up. And if there's a small group of men sitting at a table in the front window, how much space does that take up? And if we want to have a large welcome entry area, how much space additional would that be? Does that mean we're going to have like events gathering there? Is it more of just a circulation space? So square footage could be a really important piece of criteria. I might even add furniture, because there are so many different physical needs now, and we do know that the multi-purpose space has a stage, so a stage could be written under furniture. There could be specific types of furniture to support the use of the space, like bookshelves in the library, or special types of tables that can accommodate people of all ages. If families coming that has the Martinez family are going to be visiting their grandpa who invited them to come to a concert that's happening at the center. So they have a 5-year-old, and now they have an elderly person who may or may not be in a wheelchair. Thinking about spaces and furniture that can accommodate all of those. And then based on your concept, you might add a little bit more, of a different criteria. You would do the exact same exercise of creating ideas that support your concept, and then bubble diagrams that could support those ideas, with noting where and how the universal design principles could apply to your idea. So we're not really designing the space, we're creating bubble diagrams, which means we're evaluating the spaces that are required in the description and spaces that you have deemed important and why. So it's really a deep exploration of what is going to happen inside of these spaces. So essentially, you're preparing all of the information you need before you would sit down to really start designing this. This is kind of the research and the pre-design work that you would do. So this exercise, while it looks long, it is not meant to last more than 2 hours. So the intention is to rapidly iterate ideas. So come up with a concept idea fairly quickly. This isn't a serious design project. I'm not going to critique you harshly on the concept. Creating a concept is a process, and we're just at the beginning of the program. So you're getting some experience in doing that, and then taking it to the next level. But we're also focusing on the universal design principles while we think about this as well. So it's just kind of getting all of our ducks in a row before we would design. So thank you, everybody. And again, this was the in-class activity this past week. So students did use their class time to work on this. If they did not finish, they could bring it home with them and continue to work as much as they'd like, even though it is not necessarily considered homework. It's the in-class activity. So for those students, bring your hard copies back to class with you next time you come. We will bind them together in person. If you're online only, submit a PDF version of your activity sometime throughout this coming week. Don't worry about this Monday, 10/20. There is a Dropbox. It will say week 7 in class activity. And there also is a tutorial on compiling PDFs. So, and also scanning from an iPhone. That tutorial could also help inform, if you don't have an iPhone, how you can go about using your phone to create a high quality scan, because this is a good assignment to practice on. All right, thank you, everybody.